I feel kind of stupid because initially I thought the Ungols were a Slavic-based culture when they are so clearly, obviously Turkic. I mean, all you need to look at is this image and you can so obviously see how Turkic they are. Honestly, this made me think I might be a little retarded. Anyway, the Ungols are an ancient culture in Warhammer which hasn't changed that much over the centuries. They've suffered for it, but they've maintained their Turkey power throughout, so it's probably worth it. Starting with geography, the Ungols are likely native to the region that is now known as Kislev by the Gospidars. They were the masters of the land, with Ungol tribes owning every last inch of territory, and anything that wasn't theirs was ruled by the Ropsmen to their direct south, who were actually their subjects, so it was basically still theirs. The Ungols didn't really have many problems in their homeland for many millennia, spending their time fighting each other as well as orcs and goblins that occasionally came down from the mountains. However, at some point under their nose, the proto-imperial Norse tribe had beat the shit out of their vassal and forced said vassal to kamikaze themselves straight at their southern neighbor, and that southern neighbor being the burgeoning empire. The Ungols, being blinded by some foul force, decided that their vassal got themselves into it and that they could get themselves out, refusing to get involved in the conflict that their vassal allegedly started, letting the Ropsmen get brutalized by the early empire and driven north into Troll country, which would come back to bite the Ungols later in a way they could never predict. Although after the Ropsmen fled into Troll country in shame, they were followed on their heels by the Norse, who wanted to do the same thing to the Ungols. However, they didn't account for the fact that the Ungols, in terms of land, were 5 times the size of the Ropsmen, and in terms of martial power, were about 10 times more powerful. The Ungols brutally mangled the Norse tribe and beat their soft, mashable faces in, exiling them in shame to the far north. Unbeknownst to the Ungols, the Norse would later split up into some of the most dangerous Norscan tribes. Just to clarify though, the Norse weren't the first Norskins. The Norskins were still around at the time. The Norse just became some of the tribes. Anyway, after this, the Ungols would begin getting even greater grief from orc and goblin attacks coming in through the high pass. While the attacks seemed large to the Ungols, these were mere trickles from the invasion force rapidly approaching Blackfire Pass. Alarmed, the Ungol king pitched in some of his forces to the war effort, joining Sigmar Heldenhammer. The Ungols proved a very important part of the Battle of Blackfire Pass, and, like all the other 11 tribes, the Ungols were a very crucial part of the battle. With this great show of friendship and solidarity, the Ungols made a great peace with the men of the Empire, preparing to lick their wounds and live peacefully forevermore. Well, until the Gospidars came at least. The Great Gospidarian Invasion fell upon the Ungols in 1494 IC. The Ungols were still bleeding from the Great Battle of Blackfire Pass, and the Gospidars were incredibly numerous. Not only that, the Gospidars could match and sometimes even beat the Ungols in the art of horse warfare. And not only that, but the Gospidar Khan Queen was a sorcerer with no parallel. Faced with so many bad news bears, Khan Hethus Chok believed that there was probably no way he could ever win this battle. However, as the fate of his people were on the line, he decided he had to fight, raising the greatest host of Ungols ever seen, as well as rallying the now weakened Ropsmen to fight with them. In a great battle which rocked the entirety of the lands of Kislev, the Ungols fought with all of their savagery and might. However, at the end of the day, numbers and magic won, with icy winds freezing over entire ranks of horse warriors, and their greatest champions being dragged down by the numerical superiority of the Gospidars, who then poked said champions full of holes. Hethus Chak barely survived this first battle, crawling away with a fraction of his force standing to the western bastions of the Ungols, raising new forces near Norvard as well as whipping the Ropsmen into raising him another sizable tribute in men. However, realizing he could never face the Khan Queen on the field, Chak retreated behind the grand walls of the Ungol capital, confident that even if his eastern holdings had fallen, Ungol independence could be maintained with a successful defense of the city. As the Khan Queen began to send her Gospidars in waves at the walls, she herself began to bring down magical fury onto said walls, crashing them down with great barrages of ice and overpowering and killing the comparatively weak Ungol hag witches. With the great walls of Norvard smashed, Chak tried to have his and his allies defend Norvard in street combat. However, now mostly devoid of their defensive advantage, Gospidar numbers swept over the Ungol and Ropsmen defenders, bleeding the strongest of men in the streets and ringing the death knell for Ungol dominance of the lands of Kislev. Chak's incompetent ass managed to crawl from the burning ruins of Norvard, leading the half-dead and mangled of his army north from Norvard and now renamed to Erengrad by the Gospidars. They arrived at the border of Ropsmen territory, refusing hospitality and then forcing themselves in, turning arms on their now very depleted allies. In the eyes of Chak, any treaties were now void as it was kill or be killed. The Ropsman king, Wyron, outraged due to the fact that he had given everything in the war to fight alongside his allies, raised what little men he had and went to fight the Ungols in open battle. Now keep in mind at this point, both sides were pretty evenly annihilated, and both fighting for the same cause, survival. The battle was close and ended with Wyron slain and the Ropsman host scattered. Chalk took their land in Troll Country and absorbed the people of the now functionally destroyed Ropsman clan, with the Ungols occupying Troll Country. When the Khan Queen came with her hordes, Chalk wasn't stupid enough to resist this time, instead offering to take the position of the allies he had just destroyed as vassals to the gospidars rather than long-forgotten enemies. The Khan Queen, for some reason, accepted, and the Ungols were absorbed into the newly founded Kislavite Empire. The legacy of the Ungols is pretty huge, although they've been mostly culturally absorbed by their gospidar masters into a wholly new Kislavite culture. They still remain, even as a majority, in regions of Kislev like Prague, where the Ungol population has more sway than the gospidar one. Anyway, in conclusion, the Ungols are pretty cool. If you enjoyed the video, like the video, leave a comment on the video, and subscribe to the video if you want to see videos similar to this one. See ya. Somos grandes, viva Chile, mierda! De pronto se viene a comparsa llegar, de pronto se oye venir un grito de bulla y fervor popular, llegar al aire corazón, como dice el bumbo, chileno, chileno, chileno de corazón, salta en la barra y dale al tambor, que Chile va cerca, más fuerte, chileno, chileno, chileno de corazón, salta en la barra y dale al tambor, que Chile va cerca. ¡Por la mierda! ¡Arco de mierda! ¡La Chile sale! ¡Le hizo un conjuro! ¡Ah! ¡La Chile sale!